A good hermeneutical tool is if your picture of church history or of religious history could star Tom Cruise in a leading role, then you probably haven't thought nuanced enough about it.
Oh, hello. Welcome to How's It Gone? We are just two dudes from Southern California who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world and decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I'm Austin Hayden Smith.
And I am Troy Polidori.
And I'm extremely hungover today, Troy. I have been doing wedding shit, and I've been traveling, I'm jet lagged, I'm waking up at 3 in the morning, I'm going to bed at 3 in the morning. I don't know what's going on, brother. What's happening?
So are you hungover or you just feel like you're exhausted? Because those things can be different, even though they're coextensive in your life, it seems.
Yeah, I can't make a distinction between the two right now. But it has been brutal, the time change. When I first got in, it was fine. And then it was weird. Like, normally people are fucked for the first few days. I was actually fine for the first 2 days. It was like day 3, and now it's day 4, where I am, like, I just can't sleep. Like, I only sleep for 3 or 4 hours, and then I wake up because I feel like, I don't know, my body's maybe thinks it's a different time of day and it thinks I'm supposed to be awake or something. I don't know. It's weird, man.
Yeah, dude, I can't imagine the jet lag from Australia. That's just ridiculous.
Well, it's a 17-hour time difference.
At some point, does it just cancel itself out?
Well, so when I first got in, that's what I thought. Literally. So, because I left at 9 a.m. on Monday in Sydney, and I arrived at 6 a.m. on Monday in LA. And so I slept for a couple hours on the plane, and then I just stayed up all day on that Monday. And then I went to bed relatively early that night, and I woke up at like 7 the next morning, and I was like, oh, I'm good. Like, I got like a normal night's rest, and I'm okay. And so I thought that I had beaten jet lag. I thought that I had, like you said, canceled it all out, because it's like just a day you miss. But no, it's not. That's not how it works.
Your body knows, even if your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So today we're actually going to talk about. I mean, we got a couple requests. Obviously, from our Patreon agreement, we said once we get 25 patrons, we'd open it up to suggestions from people to ask or to recommend topics that we would discuss. And we've actually gotten this a few times now. Like over Twitter, we've gotten it, and we got it in the Patreon messaging system that somebody asked for us to talk about our experience and kind of why we moved out of evangelicalism. And I was talking about it with Troy. We were supposed to do something else, and I just haven't had time because I'm preparing for my sister's wedding later today. I'm actually officiating the wedding. So I got to write like my speech, and I have all these rehearsal responsibilities. And so I just haven't had time to read the text that we're going to start for our new, what are we calling it? Our parliamentary book club?
Yeah.
So I was talking with Troy, and Troy said, well, why don't we talk about this state, what is it, a statement that was issued by John MacArthur?
Yeah, it's called The Statement on Social Justice and the Gospel.
And he was like, well, why don't we talk about that in relation to our experience, because that'll probably give a good indication of, at least from Troy's perspective, and we'll see if it's the same for me. I think it is probably, of why it is that we sort of moved out of our more rigid conservative evangelical leanings, and then that what opened up that process towards being, I don't know, heretics or whatever we are now.
I'm fine with that designation.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Isn't there like some movement in the emerging church that's like that like valorizes the word heretic? It's like it's not a bad word anymore. They're like proud of wearing it as a badge of honor.
They would do that, right?
So that's what we're going to talk about today.
But before we do that, you all know we have to do the shitty minute first. This is the segment of the show where one of us talks about whatever it is that's grinding our gears this week. So, Austin, I mean, your life seems like it has to be kind of beautiful right now. Your sister's getting married, but is there anything that's getting you down?
I mean, I'm hungover and I'm grumpy, man. Everything's getting me down. Even the wedding right now. I'm like, God damn it, do I really have... No, I'm kidding. I'm really excited, actually. I'm not one to envision my own wedding so quickly, but for some reason my little sister getting married is beautiful. So Yeah. So I feel like my shitty minute is quite strained in a way. So this is going to be my shitty minute. And it kind of pertains to something I talked about in the newsletter that we just sent out to patrons yesterday, our time. So what day is it today? I have no idea when this episode will be out, so forgive us for like time discrepancies. But I talked about how impatient we are with people. And here's the thing, man. So we've been in academic communities for a long time. And even when we were in non-academic, like formal academic communities, we were still around academic type people, right? Like, I remember going over to your old apartment when you lived with Gus and what was that dude? Andrew? Was that his name?
I mean, Dex?
Dex. Dex. Yeah, fuck, I forgot his name. He looks like an Andrew.
That is his first name.
Dex. Oh, it is. Okay. Okay, I thought it was. Yeah. And Dex, and when you lived with them, and like even going over to like hang out with you, it would always be like Gus would mute commercials, right?
That was the best.
And he would he'd be watching TV and he would mute the commercials, and then he would have a reason for it, right? And it's a great reason, actually. It makes total sense. But he would like mute the commercials because he just thought it was obscene, and it is. But so like we've always been involved in academic communities, and I feel like I get skewed. And here's the thing: so like I'm able to, for the most part, I'm able to tread this boundary between the academic world and then just like dude life, right? Like, you know, I drink and I party and I fish. Like I'm going fishing in the next couple of days with one of my good buddies from Southern California.
Is fishing part of dude life? I've never heard that.
I think so. Yeah, you got to drink beer and fish, bro. You don't do that?
No. Maybe if you live in like Louisiana.
What? I feel like that's very racist of you.
I don't think it's racist. I think it's geographicist. I didn't know that Southern California people fished, and that was part of dude life.
Geographicist. Whatever. You're prejudiced, motherfucker. Jesus, man. No, man, I grew up. That's what we did. You fish, and you talk about sports, and you talk about girls, and shit like that. Like, just dude life, right? Like, because while you're fishing, that's what you do. You talk about chicks, and you talk about beer, and whatever. Like, that's just, like, part of fishing life. And I kind of grew up in that world. And so I kind of have, like, a foot in both worlds, right? But here's the thing. I've been much more intentional, I guess, about my academic life for the past, in particular, let's say 2 years. And when I step out of that life, when I step out of the academic life and I go back into just everyday kind of non-academic communities, it's really strange. I'm finding the friction between those two worlds more palpable than I ever did before. And it's kind of frustrating me. And it's not a judgment necessarily against either side in isolation, but there's this strange relational dissonance between the two worlds. There's the questions that people ask, the way that people think, Heidegger uses this term called idle chatter, right? Mm-hmm. And last night I found myself getting really bored with petty family dramas, and it's a wedding, so you've got ex-wives and ex-step cousins and all of these weird relations all coming together, and so there's dramas and people want to talk shit, and everybody likes a little bit of story, and so we dramatize those stories. But I don't know, I found myself feeling really displaced for the past couple of days quite a bit with a lot of these stories, the ones that immediately impact family. That's like, so and so had a stroke, and then this person's treating them like shit because they're not taking care of them, or they're being self-serving to try to do whatever. I don't want to talk about family dramas in public, especially because I still love these people. But I'm trying to be vague but also clear at the same time. So I hope it's not too obscure. But it's like things like that I don't mind. But it's the I don't know. There's a level of discourse that I just feel like I can't connect with, and that I get really bored with. And then I've realized that people are just so fucking impatient with other people, and it's like, guys, we're humans, man. Like, we gotta just let people be and just fucking relax and stop being so quick to make a value judgment on something. Like something happens and it's shitty and it sucks. That's fine. Acknowledge that. But then the next level where it's like, therefore, this person is a such and such person, or this person is a bad person, or this person is an asshole, and then they belabor that point, and it becomes so dramatic. There's a distinction there, and it's that latter tendency that I'm having a really hard time with. And then it makes me think, oh, you're just being a fucking intellectual snob. So I don't really know what the answer is. I'm more just venting, and like I said, I'm hungover, so my mind hurts, and I'm tired, and I just don't know what to think about it, really.
Yeah, I was thinking you're bringing up Heidegger's notion of idle talk or idle chatter, and I always had this kind of palpable experience whenever you sort of see someone or talk to someone that you haven't talked to in a long time, but you used to be fairly close to. The kind of person
Yes.
that you were not just acquaintance with, but you would actually be able to let your guard down and kind of be yourself around. If you haven't seen that person in a long time, maybe you come back and talk for whatever reason, and that sense of comfortability that you feel like you should be able to slip back into is just not there.
Mm.
And it's very rigid and formulaic, and there's certain things you feel like you have to say and how guarded you have to be. Like
Do
that,
you just fall back at that point? Do you just fall back into nostalgia, like talking about memories?
when I'm thinking about this experience.
No. In that moment when you catch up with that person, do you just fall back into that where you just like because it's that awkwardness? Do you guys just resort to, hey, remember that time and remember these people and remember those things? Because that's that exact tendency that you're talking about. That's what I experience that too, and then I feel like I usually just resort to that. We just kind of talk about the old days. We don't talk about anything substantial in the present anymore.
Yeah, and I feel like even when you do that, though, the nostalgia stuff, it's still this guarded. You're doing that because you're guarding from the essence of the conflict, which is we don't have anything in common anymore, or we don't have that base or fundamental like piece to be comfortable with. So like, yeah, I mean, I really hate that experience. It sucks. Like, it almost makes you wonder if, well, is my memory actually correct? What did I actually feel like I was comfortable in those surroundings, or am I just remembering it that way because I'd like to remember it that way? It
Yeah,
sucks. I hate that. It's the worst.
me too.
And it seems like
Yeah,
it's the general mode of sort of adult interactions is to be that
that's
way.
the thing. Yeah, and that's the thing is for some reason I think I had different expectations of what it meant to be an adult and have adult discourse. I think I thought that it was going to be more profound, and then I'm around a bunch of adults and I'm like, Jesus Christ, you guys are boring. And I'm an adult now. Like we talked about this. Like once you're in your 30s, like you can't fuck around anymore. You are an adult. There's no more like, oh, I'm still a kid. I mean, you can still be youthful. It's not like you're on your deathbed or something like that, dying of old age, but you're not a kid anymore. You are an adult. And so I'm in this weird transition where I'm trying to reconcile my expectations of what adulthood was with the realities based on people that I grew up around, that were the ones that were the model that told me what adulthood was. And it's not a smooth transition.
Yeah, I mean, after Heidegger talks about idle talk, he talks about averageness, which is like this tendency that we have to sort of scrape off any sort of distinctive features about ourselves to become more like the average, kind of like
Mm,
keeping up with the Joneses kind of thing. Like you kind of want to make sure you're more like everybody else than different. And conversation
mm,
just naturally tends towards that, right? You talk about things that don't make you distinctive, right? Only the things that are, talking about the weather or really base things about politics, the person will agree with, rather than actually saying, here are things that I don't know, but I want to know. Like, what do you think about these? Challenging ourselves. Like those tendencies, which are so fundamental in college because all of your beliefs are being challenged and you're
mm,
used to it. Like that's the normal state of
right,
affairs, is to be challenged and to sort of go searching and trying to discover what's true. But
right.
yeah, adulthood, that's like considered childhood naivete. And you need to just kind of
Yeah.
fill your role.
Yeah, and the thing is I think that I have been able to, because of what I study and the field where I work and the people that I've surrounded myself with, I've been able to prolong that quote unquote childhood naivete for the entirety of my adult life. And I actually prefer it. I prefer being inquisitive. I prefer questioning and thinking and not being so involved in contingent like relational things, but being patient with people and questioning, like, well, why is that person this way? And what happened to create that tension and things like that? Those just aren't the questions that you have when you're drunk at a rehearsal dinner at a wedding, you know?
Yeah, dude, philosophy is about wonder.
Yeah. But you know what's amazing? No bullshit. It is about wonder. It's about puzzlement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Philosophy begins with puzzlement. Was that Aristotle that said that?
Or Milton Bradley. I forget which one.
Same. The thing was, though, is whenever people did ask me, like, what do you research and what are you working on right now? You know, I always, not because I'm trying to dumb it down because I don't think they're capable, but there's, you know, there are questions and there's a technical language and there's a way of exploring things when you're so far down the road that you kind of have to make it palatable, right? And so I would make it palatable, and then all of a sudden, you know, they keep asking questions and they keep asking questions. And people are actually really fascinated, though. Like, I was talking about my work on time in relation to speculation and derivatives and asset pricing and markets. And they're like, well, how does philosophy come into this? And then I'm talking about ontology, and I was doing my best. And they were like, no, I understand that this isn't my wheelhouse. And I think just because also I'm pretty good at like the typical basic conversations as well. So I'm not socially awkward. And so I think that I'm able to kind of work through it with them and let them know that I'm not trying to talk down to them. And if I do, then I apologize and I'm like, hey, hold me back or whatever. And so like we're able to have this really lovely back and forth. And I had like actually really rich conversations with a couple of people, you know, that they were like, this is fascinating. And then we had to like stop because it was time for a toast or time for dinner or time for dessert or whatever. So I wonder, you know, people who are college educated, but they're not academics, like my sister's fiance's brother and his wife and I had an amazing conversation. And he works in business, but he's not like an economist or anything like that. But, you know, he has a basic grasp on what happened in 2008 with the financial collapse. But we were talking about that and the relationship with like liquidity issues and things. And he was super fascinated with it. And he was able to ask these like really pressing questions and express frustrations in a way that were way more profound than I think academics then give credit. So at the same time, as much as I'm bemoaning idle chatter, there's also a sense in which I think people are so much more primed for philosophy. They're primed for these deep discussions, and when they are asking me how it is that I'm orienting myself to these typical questions of politics, philosophy, culture, economics, or whatever, in a way that was different than you hear in the media or that you read in the Wall Street Journal or whatever, they were actually like, they were really susceptible to listening to it, and they were like, oh my God, this is so interesting. And so this is why I have fucking faith that we should be patient with people. Because I think people are much more capable than academics give them credit for a lot of times. So that's the other side of the shitty minute, you know? As much as I can bemoan idle chatter, it's also like, yeah, idle chatter sucks, but that's only because maybe they don't have recourse to anything else at the moment.
Yeah, your shitty minutes always turn into like you know, repurposed, recycled shit into like, I don't know, like sustenance or whatever. But yeah, no, I totally agree, dude. Like, this is one thing with the pessimism of like the post-Heideggerian stuff I'm just not down with, because I mean, yeah, idle talk and idle chatter is a phenomenon, but I don't think anybody actually wants it. You know, like,
yes,
they're capable of not doing it. I think that's absolutely the case. Very much like a, you know, Plato's Meno kind of a person. I think everyone's capable of this stuff, and they don't want it. We only do it because it's the least risky option, and we've probably been burned before by being too open and vulnerable. Everyone has, and so we just kind of fall back on this least risky option for the sake of sort of saving ourselves. And that's like totally rational. I get that, right? But no one actually wants this shit. No one likes these sort of relationships, these sort of surface level, you know, relationships that we formulate. But it's just difficult. It's hard to not fall into that. It's just so natural. It's the way that our societies have been built, that we're supposed to occupy these very, you know, stratified and distinctive roles. And if we go outside of those things, in a way, we're kind of challenging the system, and that makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah. That's actually like a fucking perfect transition to get into our main segment, isn't it, brother?
It is?
I don't know. I just felt like doing a segue.
It kind of ruins the segue when you name the segue, though, right?
Segue.
All right, so for our main topic on this episode, we're talking about the statement on social justice in the gospel. And hey, Austin, we didn't discuss this beforehand, but are we going to name names in this podcast, or are we just going to kind of like let people figure that out for themselves?
Names.
Yeah,
John
what do we have to
MacArthur,
lose? Our degrees?
Phil Johnson. Fucking names.
Can they take back our degrees? They can't do that legally, right?
No, it's not. They're gonna lose their accreditation anyway, so fuck it.
So the statement on social justice in the gospel is just a totally non-ecclesiastical statement produced by various conservative evangelical pastors and even like some non-pastoral but leading authoritative figures in that very loose movement of churches and organizations. And the basic idea is, I think, creating a wedge between parts of evangelicalism that are concerned with sort of quote-unquote social justice issues. So you can think of parts of evangelicalism that would be sympathetic to Black Lives Matter or to like more resisty type, facile, centrist liberalism, and just all the kinds of evangelicalism that would move a little bit more towards the political arena and want to be involved in that sort of culture. And in its many variegated forms. So it's not like one thing, it's very many things. And this kind of small cadre of conservative evangelicals who don't want that in whatever form that it comes, who want to stay, I think siloed wouldn't be an inaccurate term. Maybe it has a negative connotation, but stay siloed in their sort of conservative evangelical communities. And they honestly believe that this is the best way to make the world better, whatever that means. So there's a number of things we could talk about, but I think we wanted to gloss over maybe just a couple points in the statement and talk a little bit more about our own experiences with this stuff, since wouldn't that be the best way to counter this, by talking about our own subjective experiences as if they have authority?
Yeah.
The most postmodern thing you can do.
Oh God, I hate that word so much. Postmodern. What the fuck is it? You know what's funny? So I read this declaration, and when we were in university, it was 2006 to 2009. About, is that right? 2005
for you, yeah.
And you were 2005 to 2009.
I was 04 to 08.
04 to Jesus. Oh yeah, because I only went there for, I guess it was 2.5 years. 3 years, or whatever it was, 3 years. But during that time, so we went to a private evangelical college in Southern California, and the president of our college is a very well-known American evangelical pastor, writer. He hosts a very popular radio show called Grace to You. His name's John MacArthur. And I actually dated his niece for a long time, so fuck it.
Oh man, I forgot about that.
Oh yeah, I had many lovely conversations with the guy. When her dad was very harsh on me because he thought that I was studying philosophy and was going to potentially contaminate his daughter's commitment. He actually came. Yeah, he was absolutely right. I know, he absolutely was right. But it was funny. MacArthur came to my side, but not because like philosophy is good, but more like I think that you're a good young man, because I was studying Bible. So he, I think he didn't know me, and I'm good with people, as I said, and I can bullshit with the best of them. So I think I probably, not that I was disingenuous necessarily, but I was able to paint myself in a more flattering light than I think he really understood.
Yeah, at the time though, you honestly believed that it was authentic.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't like manipulative or anything like that. I really, yeah, exactly. But I remember his war at the moment, because he's done this throughout his life. He wrote a book against like the prosperity gospel. He wrote a book against churches that believe in the gifts of the Spirit, like speaking in tongues and miracles and healings and things like that. He's written books against. He's very much like an oppositional preacher, right?
Polemical, yeah, very much so.
Very much so. So it's almost like he's always distancing himself from what he sees as either a bastardization of the gospel or the degradation of culture and society. And he's always trying to say that there is this objective standard by which he's given the authority to make these critical pronouncements. And at the time, his mission from 2004, let's say 2005 to 2009, was all about cultural relativism and this movement in America that was really popular, and I think it kind of spread elsewhere around the world, that was called the Emerging Church, and their embracing of post-structuralist theological and philosophical orientations into their church practices.
And you should say very, very loosely tied to the philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, like if you've so voices like Doug Pagitt and Brian McLaren, and who else was involved in that world?
I mean, Mark Driscoll a little bit, but he was a little bit more
yeah.
conservative, yeah.
Yeah, because he was still theologically Calvinist, which was strange.
Yeah. And who was the guy who wrote Blue Like Jazz?
Oh yeah, what was his name?
I forget his name. I read that book though back in the day.
Was it good?
I don't remember.
Yeah. Blue
like most
Jazz,
of those things,
right.
it was so surface level that just nothing sticks afterwards. Really, more like a feeling sticks more than content.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was really popular in America for a long time, and I feel like it's so funny because I hear evangelicals, certain conservative, more reformed evangelicals, talk about now how they've like weathered the storm of the emerging church that went away. I'm like, no, it didn't go away. It became normal. It just isn't a thing now. Like, if you go to a church in Los Angeles, all that stuff that the emerging church dudes were like working through is like standard practice now and presumed now.
It's either standard practice or the people just left the church because they got sick of bullshit. So like, yeah,
that's the other thing. And they became
didn't weather
vegan.
Anything.
They became vegan craft brew makers or whatever. But so his thing then at the time was like relativism and truth, and there was like a culture war that I didn't even think was a culture war that he was instigating. And I feel like this statement is just an extension of that exact same battle that he was engaging in.
Yeah, it's just the next step, really, or maybe even more of like this is the foundation of those steps, because I think there's a certain worldview, and I hate to use that term, but I do think in a kind of a strict sense.
What is it? Weltanschauung. It's okay. It's a good Freudian
It's a
term.
good philosophical term.
Yeah.
Where there's this belief that they have this kind of super hold on the truth and on the vanguard, right? And there's one monolithic group assaulting it called the capital W world. And that comes from certain readings of, the Pauline corpus, and that sort of make them think that everything from the charismatic movement to the prosperity gospel to critical race theory to intersectionality to the emerging church to, anybody who's like read a book that's above a 11th grade reading level is sort of assaulting them by asking questions or by having concerns.
And I think it's important to note that they literally, in this statement, those exact terms that you just mentioned are cited explicitly, so that you're not just riffing, like hypothetically. That's exactly what they say.
Yeah, and I'm just tying it to the long history. This stuff is not new, right? This worldview has been built up for a long time, and this is just one more manifestation of it, which is fine, right? I don't think that really anybody MacArthur's side would disagree with that. I don't think. I don't think I'm painting it in a sort of unfavorable light. That's just the way that they think that the world is set up currently. The stakes are set up in this way. A small minority have hold of the truth, and there's a huge majority assaulting them against it, whether consciously or not.
Yeah. So what was it that most struck you about this particular declaration then?
Well, I think there's kind of two things I'd want to talk about. And one is the one that's gotten the most traction, which is the sections of the statement that are on social justice and race and racism and culture, which are interesting and I think probably important to talk about. But the first thing I wanted to talk about, and maybe ask you about, it's a thing that I've kind of harped on a lot, especially when, my exit from evangelicalism the segue for that came through Karl Barth, who was another Christian theologian in the 20th century. He was a German theologian who opposed the Nazis, and but has worked a lot more on sort of his systematic theology. And one thing about this statement you'll see, which I think my sort of early Bardian inclinations sort of revile against, is what's the first section of the article? Do you remember?
Hold on. I have it queued up right here. The first section is Scripture.
Yeah, it's Scripture. Whenever you talk to
it is.
these more conservative evangelicals, the real reason that they're different than, emerging church types or even Pentecostal types or really any other sort of denomination of Christianity, Catholics, is that they have this intense, I think, fetishization of Scripture. And they would, I'm sure, balk at that idea that it's fetishization.
100%.
That sounds,
they would.
yeah. And they would say that it's
because they don't understand what fetishization means. They think of it as like you like butt stuff or you like to tickle people or something like that.
Well, even in the non-sexual use of the term, I think fetishization it has a connotation of irrationality to it, and I'm sure they would balk at that, which is fine. Like, of course they would. But I think the reason why I use the term fetishization is that it's not really a reasoned out process, and it's certainly not subject to any sort of reason. In fact, I'm sure they would admit that it's not subject to reason, because the whole point is that Scripture comes before reason, and before your sort of human finite capacities for logical thinking are fallen, and they are bastardized, and they're corrupted. And so you need Scripture to correct that. We were always told that in school, right? Whenever we would have questions that were of a logical nature about these things. Well, your rational capacities are fallen and corrupted, so you can't ask those questions, right? And
Yeah.
one thing that Bart really helped me kind of think about is that in Scripture itself, the authority is not Scripture.
Right.
Scripture itself cites an authority,
Yes.
and that authority is God. And specifically for the New Testament, it's Jesus who is God, like the person of Jesus, literally the person.
That's right.
And that really helped me see that, when these conservative evangelicals, I don't think they're consciously doing it, but when they're raising Scripture up to the point where it is God, and they very much do that. I mean, I remember being
100%.
surprised one time when we saw some sort of like statement that we were supposed to repeat, or like it was the mission statement of the school or something, and there were 3 different things. It was God, Jesus, and Scripture, or something like that. And it was like as if they had added a 4th person to the Trinity. In fact, we called it the Quadrinity sometimes, right? God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and Scripture.
In the Bible.
And of course, only one of those gets interpreted by leading authorities, right? Which is Scripture, right? So it's Scripture, but as interpreted by us, not by other people. So they have sort of a power grip on that. And then also, I think most importantly, there's this assumption that Scripture is one thing. That it's like this invariable sort of unitary thing that just, it's very clear and conspicuous what it's saying. What's the term they always use for the fact that Scripture just has an obvious meaning and everyone can see it?
I don't remember.
There was a term that they always use for it, which is, I always thought was total bullshit. No, I forget the term. But anyway, it just means that the meaning is transparent. You don't have to actually dig around for
Perspicuous?
secret meanings. Yeah. Well, I mean, that was part of it, was perspicuous.
Yeah.
Anyway, one lesson you learn, I think, from really studying the Bible is that it's extremely variable, right?
Right.
There's all sorts of things in there of many different genres, from many different people, from many different perspectives. Did you read Walter Brueggemann book, The Prophetic Imagination, when we were in college?
Bro, that book ruined my life in
me too,
profound way. Oh my God. I follow him on Twitter because I love Brueggemann so much.
How did that affect you?
So I don't remember exactly, but I remember thinking that prophecy wasn't about foretelling the future, but it was a forthtelling, a proclamation that was a correction. And what it made me view the prophets as distinct from and critical of the Levitical priesthood, which
Yeah.
meant that the Bible itself was critical of itself. And I didn't understand how that could be the case at the time.
Yeah, that exploded my mind because that contradicts the
Yeah.
very idea that Scripture is this unitary phenomenon.
Right. Yeah, that somehow the prophets, Jeremiah, this weeping prophet that evangelicals like to tout, but what they didn't understand is that he's weeping against rigid dogmatism. And they would even say, oh, but that's what Jesus did. He railed against the Levitical priesthood. And so that Jeremiah is just criticizing a bastardized expression of the Levitical priesthood. That's not at all what Jeremiah was criticizing. That's not at all what Isaiah is calling attention to. They're actually literally criticizing the law itself in a profound way.
Yeah, Jeremiah says, God says, I did not say to you to do these things. Like straight up, the things that are in the first 5 books, the Pentateuch.
And they have a convenient way of explaining that away again. That's the civil law, and it was just there as a taskmaster temporarily to show sin, blah, 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 whatever. Or it was there as like a...
Yeah, it's rationalization, right? Which we're really, really good at doing as human beings. And it's the way we can believe things that otherwise we would think are incredibly stupid, which everyone does, right? It's just a natural thing. I mean, you look at the statement on Scripture, one of my favorite things that I saw in there is that it says that the moral authority of Scripture comes from the 10 Commandments, which is the summary of all morality, and that it's a summary of all. Literally, the word is unchanging morality. And well, wait a minute. There are some things in the 10 Commandments that those same conservative evangelicals don't follow because they changed, like obeying the Sabbath. There's nothing in the 10 Commandments that says obey the Sabbath, but if we change that, no big deal. It wasn't really about morality anyway. There is no distinction between the moral commandments and the Levitical commandments, the sort of celebratory, ceremonial commandments, which is the distinction that the conservative evangelicals make. There is no distinction like that. Those were all seen as moral at the time.
Yeah. I think real quick, before we go, yes, 100%, but real quick, I think it's important for us to make it clear to people that are listening too, that there's a reactionary, like Dan Brown Da Vinci Code reading of this that we're not advocating, I don't think. That is like these corrupt priests were just trying to control people, and so they orchestrated these bullshit conventions to canonize things so that they could control the bloodline of Jesus or something along those lines. I mean, the funny thing is there's a little truth in that, in the sense that there was an effort to manage power relations and things like that. But it's much more complex than the sort of like typical reactionary secular reading of these things that we're talking about.
Yeah, a good hermeneutical tool is if your picture of sort of church history or of religious history could star Tom Cruise in a leading role, then you probably haven't thought nuanced enough about it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Daniel Day-Lewis, maybe, but not Tom Cruise.
Yeah, it's got to be a little bit more complex than that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the whole idea that Scripture comes first is the foundation of all this, I think, because it's a very particular reading of Scripture, which is not one you find anywhere in the history of Christianity until the last, 50 to 60 years, maybe 150 years if you want to go back to the beginnings of dispensationalism in America.
That's what I was going to... It was probably the rise of fundamentalism at the turn of the 20th century, or the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some differences in that the early fundamentalists were much more concerned with cultural issues in a very specific way than these conservative evangelicals are, but maybe they're making a turn towards that by making these statements. I'm not really sure.
Did you ever read that book by Machen called like Modernism? Was that the name of the book? J. Gresham Machen?
Yeah, I think I read some of that at some point. I don't remember any of it though.
Dude, I haven't thought about that book in like 10 years.
He was the guy who influenced Van Til, right?
I think he was the first president of Princeton Seminary or something like that.
Yeah, man, I haven't looked at that stuff in so many years.
Jesus, this is like I feel like this is another world. Like I don't even. It's Jesus. I just remember how. So Machen was this theologian, biblical scholar, and he wrote this book. It was something called like Modernism or On Modernism or Against Modernism. And modernism at the time, in the way that he discussed it, was the very same thing that MacArthur is kind of, I think, separating himself from. I almost feel like he feels like I think he sees himself as carrying the mantle of these, in his mind, great forefathers that fought against the negative influence of culture, right? And so Machen is writing against, like the turn into the 18th and into the 1800s into the 1900s, this influence of what he saw as like a secular influence over life. And I think MacArthur is just kind of echoing some similar sentiments. So it's kind of a similar tradition and trajectory, but it's very American, you know? Like you don't see this. It's a very contingent historical thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I think this whole postmodernism idea is so stupid, because it's not about postmodernism, whatever that may be. Even the constituents that are applied to postmodernism, which is the critical race theory or intersectionality or whatever they want to call it, it's really about culture at large. It's about the outside world. They see the outside world as trying to creep in and change their church, and they want to stop that. They have their certain cultural authorities, their sort of intracultural authorities, and they want to keep those as is, sort of frozen in time, however recent that the beginnings of that time may be. And any creep from the outside in is seen as a threat, whether it be from modernism, postmodernism, or anything.
Yeah. And it's strange. I mean, this was, people ask me all the time, so what was it that initiated your shift out of your kind of more committed relationship to Christianity? I mean, I don't know how committed I was to an extent when I look back on it, to be honest. I was kind of looking for a home, and I had a traumatic experience, and I believed in the core of my being. You know, I saw the world through a different lens in so many ways. But at the same time, I feel like I wasn't raised like some people are in that world. So I didn't have the 20 plus years of conditioning. And I think that also probably allowed me some flexibility in my transition or my critical distancing away from that community as well. But people always ask me, so what was it that really initiated? And I say, well, really, I think there were a bunch of things, but there were two streams that were going at the same time. One was personal and one was intellectual. And the intellectual stream, there are two sources that I generally, when I'm telling the narrative, that I trace it back to. One was N.T. Wright and this idea that's called the New Perspective on Paul. So for people out there, if you want, you can Google it. But N.T. Wright is a New Testament scholar, and he's not, and even he's conservative still. I mean, he's Orthodox. You know, he's a good Anglican. He was the Bishop of fucking Durham. You know, so it's not like he's a crazy, you know, heterodox theologian.
He's only heterodox from the perspective of the most conservative fundamentalists in America.
Exactly. But so there's something called the New Perspectives on Paul. So I read N.T. Wright and then like E.P. Sanders and James Dunn, and that shit ruined me in a very profound sense. But really, the one that caught my attention that stands out to me so much was I read The Postmodern Condition by Jean-François Lyotard. And it was because postmodernism was such a buzzword, that it was such this boogeyman, that I said, oh, I got to understand what this thing is. What is postmodernism then? So I read this book, and then I read another book. It's called The Postmodern Explained, which is a series of letters and clarifications that he wrote years later, where he's kind of expanding on or engaging in critical dialogue with friends and interlocutors about his book, The Postmodern Condition. And I read this and I said, oh, this isn't at all what the church is telling me postmodernism is. And I said, why are they misrepresenting this? Why are they not capable? Why are they not willing even to actually go to the source and listen to it in a way that would be charitable to the voice, but they're just creating a straw man ultimately? And I said, why are they doing that? And that to me was a chink in the armor, and it made me realize, maybe for the first time, like a distortion of power amongst a community that I thought wasn't distorted by ideology.
That's so funny. Did you take the Theology of Paul class with Thorcell?
Dude, that class was like my favorite class that I took there.
Because we weren't in it together then. You must have taken it after I did.
I was either a year, because he only did it every 2 years, and we actually had to beg him to do it because he wasn't supposed to do it that year. and it was me and like Gutfeld, and man, we're just dropping names right now. I love it. Dave, if you're listening, I love you, brother. But it was me and like Dave, and there were like, dude, I think Trey was in that class with me.
Dude, I wish I had taken it with you guys. I took it with a bunch of boring ass, like sycophants. But still, reading N.T. Wright and mostly James Dunn and E.P. Sanders and stuff, and it was just
Yeah, because Dunn's text was the text for the class.
yeah, and it totally rocked my world as far as how to interpret scripture from an actually exegetical point of view, and not from a let's try and find a way to harmonize this with things we already think, which is really what conservative evangelicals, I think, actually do. They don't think of it that way. They think of it as pure exegesis. But it really is harmonization comes first, which really means rationalization comes first. And that was challenged by this book.
It's a suppressing tendency, too.
Yeah,
harmonization is suppression.
It suppresses difference, exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you finally get to the, hey, let's actually raise up the difference and think about it, what it means. That was a whole different way of looking at how to read scripture. And it totally illuminated, for me, actually, not just the New Testament, but the Old Testament mostly. It made the Old Testament so much more rich to think about what were the stakes the prophets actually had in comparison to the Levitical priesthood and whatnot. And that was just, I mean, it made the like Chronicles and Kings and stuff, the history is kind of boring as shit, but it made the prophets totally illuminated.
Yeah, this is what's so interesting. You get so many people today that are kind of more, we'll say, secular. And in the future, we're going to do a book by Dan Barber. And so actually these terms are going to be really deconstructed, the idea of the secular and the religious. So foreshadowing, it'll be in a few months probably. But let's just say the secular interpretation of the Old Testament is like, my God, God was such an asshole. He was this vindictive, violent fucker, right?
Yeah, the guy who murders his son on a cross is not vindictive and violent.
Well, exactly. Yeah, like the Jesus of the New Testament and the God of the New Testament is loving and embrace your neighbor. And there's no. Do you know what propitiatory atonement is?
Yeah, that's pretty nasty,
fucking
yo.
Nasty, man. But no, the Old Testament. When you change your hermeneutical frame, I actually think the Old Testament is beautiful in so many ways. As a text, as a very diverse collection of thoughts about people struggling with cultural identity and religious connection and mysticism, and there's poetry and there's apocalypticism and there's history and there's all these crazy different genres of literature and thought that are interweaving. And whenever people are like, the Old Testament is this, I'm like, guys, it's not a monolith. It's this fucking crazy genre, or this crazy collection of genres. And once you understand these different genres, it totally transforms how it is that you understand everything about what it is that these people, who are not necessarily distinct, like look at ancient Sumeria. Like if we look at ancient Babylonian texts, we look at the Epic of Gilgamesh. Like these themes are so rich in what they're trying to tell us about that time and who people were and what they were dealing with, that we can't be so dismissive. That doesn't mean that this is breathed out by God in the way that American evangelicals want to tout. But it does mean, and I think Tom Airy, actually, in our third or fourth or fifth episode or whatever the fuck it was, when we had him on, and he said, I don't take the Bible literally, but I take it seriously. I loved that because I got what he was saying. Now, he's probably a bit more committed to the confession of faith than either you and I are at the moment. But nevertheless, there was something profoundly beautiful in that statement that I think, we should take the Bible seriously for what it is. But then we have to figure out what the fuck it is.
Yeah, and we should add, I think, this is not the invention of 21st century Christians or us or anybody else that's current. This is actually, this kind of interpretation of the Jewish Bible is like the standard use of the Jewish Bible in Judaism, all the way from like the Talmud to Maimonides and to modern rabbinical stuff. Like this is not like a new radical thing, right? This is an old thing, way of treating the Jewish Bible. So we're really just kind of riffing on what kind of Jews have been doing with the Jewish Bible for a long time.
Yeah, 100%. Because what is it? It's the Mishnah, and what's the other commentary on Jesus? So there's Talmud, there's Mishnah, and then there's, God, I'm going back into my fucking vaults in my brain here. I can't remember. But there are all these commentaries that were historically consonant with the actual writing of the text itself, So it's like the text that has been canonized is also a suppressing of difference. I'm in my work right now. I'm thinking about this tendency towards inscription, enclosure, and quantification, and I'm using this in reference to like financialized markets and the logic of capitalism. But I think there's a much deeper tendency in human thought, and so I'm connecting this with psychoanalysis and the idea of like language. But there's a tendency to inscribe, which you codify something, and then you enclose, like you capture it, you incorporate it into a system, and then you quantify it. You measure it somehow. You take bits of information and you turn them into something that is manageable so that you can measure it against something else. It's a tendency towards equivalence. And it's not a bad thing. I'm not making a value judgment. I think this is kind of one of the ways that rationality works, one of the ways that reflective consciousness works. Maybe the way, I don't know. But the Old Testament, as we understand it, as canonized, is inscribed, it's enclosed, and it's quantified in a way, right? And it's codified. And the thing that's amazing is that alongside that codification is this really rich tradition of commentary on that codification itself. And evangelicals don't pay any attention to that whatsoever, because by erecting the canon as being breathed out by God, those commentaries on the canon are viewed as just pure speculation. They're viewed as just human things. They're not viewed as being inspired by God. And I think that really devalues the tradition and the history of theological storytelling and theological myth-making,
And it also allows you to cast yourself as not myth-making and speculation.
Exactly.
Rather than saying these people were in the same place that I was, trying to deal with the same difficult text that I'm trying to deal with. You just ignore it all and say, yeah, so for 1900 years, everyone did it wrong, but now we're doing it right, and I'm not going to explain why.
That's what they say about the Protestant Reformation, right? That the Protestant Reformation was the correction of like 1,500 years of misunderstanding or something along those lines.
Yeah, I remember one time I had someone was talking about how they were like taking a class on the Church Fathers or something. They were like, what I can't believe is just like the second generation, right after Jesus, right? The people who like Justin Martyr were so soon after the apostles had already messed everything up. I was like, can you take a step back a minute and maybe think that you're wrong? That there was just this fundamental belief that they just had it, and that apparently everything had fallen apart immediately after the apostles. Rather than that every generation after the apostles was trying to deal with a very difficult set of concepts which didn't square easily. Paul himself was doing that, and that's why he and Peter fought.
The Bible itself is a wrestling. It itself is self-critical. Like the Bible as we understand, and the reason it's self-critical is because it's not a singular, monolithic, like perfectly composed story. It is a collection of voices trying to figure shit out. Paul is the perfect example of this, of someone trying to figure out how the fuck do we reconcile all of these promises and these expectations of this Messiah and the Abrahamic covenant and these ideas that God would keep and protect a people for himself and erect a singular global community. How do we reconcile that with this dude that I firmly believe is the fulfillment of those promises? That's what he's trying to figure out, And the evangelical viewpoint can't entertain that. It's not a fluidity, because that just sounds so cheap for what it is. But the
struggle, the antagonism.
Yeah.
It's fundamental to all understanding, whether it's theological, philosophical, or otherwise.
Right.
And
Yeah.
here's where I think the real kind of catch comes in. The stuff in this statement that's really made news is the stuff on race and culture. I just want to quote a couple things here from the
Okay.
statement so we can talk about it for a minute. On social justice, the statement says, we deny that social justice is evidence of saving faith or constitutes a central part of the church's mission. We deny that laws or regulations possess any inherent power to change sinful hearts. On race, they say they deny that Christians to segregate themselves into racial groups or regard racial identity above or equal to their identity in Christ. And we deny that a person's feelings of offense or oppression necessarily prove that someone else is guilty of sinful behaviors, oppression, or prejudice. That's a very striking statement. What they think is going on is that people are just feelings over facts, like a Ben Shapiro kind of thing going on there. About culture, they say, we affirm that some cultures operate on assumptions that are inherently better than those of other cultures because of the biblical truths that inform those worldviews that have produced these distinct assumptions. So from no race is superior to any other to some cultures are superior to others. It's a striking contradiction that I find. And then about racism, we deny that the contemporary evangelical movement has any deliberate agenda to elevate one ethnic group and subjugate another. And we emphatically deny that lectures on social issues are vital for the health of the church. Historically, these things are distractions that inevitably lead to departures from the gospel.
Oh shit.
So,
You know what's so funny? I when I hear this, I think immediately. Remember that blog, like Pyrotheology or what? No, not Pyrotheology. What was it? Pyromaniacs or whatever the fuck it was. It was Phil Johnson's blog, who's John MacArthur's longtime editor. And when I read this, I'm like, this isn't John MacArthur necessarily. I mean, it is, but it's Phil Johnson as an editor. Like, I feel like because he's so, and it might not be him per se, but it's that rhetoric, that drawing a line in the sand and making these simple delineations between this side, we affirm this, we deny this, is very Phil Johnson-esque.
Yeah, I mean, I think being sort of extremely, what do you call it, like declamatory like that is
Yes.
what they're going for, and it's very Phil Johnson.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, so I mean, they wouldn't see these as contradictions, of course, right? There's ways of rationalizing around them, but I think it's really hard to read these at face value and not just see this inherent contradiction, which says that on one hand, everybody's equal in Christ, and there should be no racial divisions. But then also, some cultures are better than others because they affirm biblical truths more than others. And that there's no racism at all in the evangelical movement, the true, authentic evangelical movement, a full-on, like, no Scotsman fallacy going on there.
Right.
And that any lectures on social issues distract from the gospel. There's this idea that justice in the world is just not itself of a fundamental importance to Christianity. Or, maybe to put it more charitably, it's only by focusing on the gospel solely, this sort of enlarging the conservative evangelical movement is what that means, I think, really. That any sort of worldly justice could be achieved, but then I don't think they really are concerned with that at all, even as like a happy byproduct.
Well, no, because they're ultimately nihilists. And I mean this not in like this isn't like just some sort of ad hominem, like they're dicks or something like that, but they're nihilists in the philosophical sense, that this world doesn't really matter. This world, ultimately, I just spent a bunch of time with my dad and my stepmom, who are still very committed, Reformed Christians, and that's one of the things they always try to instill in me. They're worried that somehow my philosophical and political economic concerns are my effort to save myself. And they want to always remind me, but remember, this world doesn't ultimately matter. And we need to keep our mind on the things that are really important and valuable, because all of these things will fade away. And so there's a nihilism there, that this world is a means to an end, that this world is just a temporary home, and this world doesn't really ultimately matter. And I think that that's so important to remember, because that's a huge cause of the frame or the prism by which evangelical communities view the world and interpret facts and view politics and look at politicians. that there is an essential nihilism that conditions their thought.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I also think we need to add that there's a long history in pretty much all religions, but in Christianity specifically as well, that doesn't have that strain, that nihilistic strain at all. That does believe in things like the afterlife and heaven and whatnot, but that has the state of the world as of fundamental importance, morally,
Do you-
in terms of
like the social
justice or
gospel
otherwise.
movement and like Dorothy Day and the Catholic workers and fucking St. Francis even, right? Like thousands of years of tradition. So here's my question to you. Do you think that we could say, not to reduce it to a simple singular idea, but do you think that we could say that the orientation that isn't concerned with social justice, that it's ultimately about a fear based on this interpretation of works versus grace in salvation? That they think that social justice is problematic because they view it, not necessarily that it is viewed, but they view it as being a replacement for supposed grace without works, which actually contradicts what James says, but whatever. Do you think that we could say that there's like, that's what they're ultimately rebelling against?
Yeah, I think charitably, that's certainly I think how they would put it. Um, but I don't think that's actually what's really going on. Not like I'm claiming they're like in false consciousness or anything necessarily, but from a macro view, it doesn't seem to me like these really kind of arcane theological concepts are what's really at play here. It really seems to me like these things are a threat to the leader's power, right? The idea that we would need to have some moral duty to make the world a better place means that we would have to team up with people who similarly think we should make the world a better place, even if they're of different theological convictions. And
Mm,
that idea, which is a kind of an emerging church idea as
mm.
well, right? More ecumenism, more
Ecumenical, yeah.
rapprochement, those are threats because they take the power away from those who are the sort of authoritative uh, interpreters of Scripture. Right? Who are the people who tell us what Scripture means? Well, it's these handful of people, and they're going to
Mm.
lose their authority if other figures from outside that movement can say anything.
Okay, if I can add something. So you're couching this as a power thing, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying like consciously individually, but from a
No,
macro
of
point of
course.
view, yeah.
Yeah, of course, right. Um, so it's like an unconscious ideological in the psychoanalytic sense ideology, not like the way that it's popularly used. It's this like fear, and so there's a resistance, but it's about power. I wonder. So I've been, in the past, I'd say year and a half, I've been reading a lot of psychoanalysis, work on Lacan, Freud, and then interpreters of them. Um, and one of the things that I see is that in psychoanalysis, they are critical of like what Todd McGowan calls the Foucauldianization of the narrative. And what he means by that is Foucault, in his mind, reduces everything to power based on like his interpretation, based on Foucault's interpretation of Nietzsche and deployment of this idea of power structures and things like that. And McGowan says that he's like, I think that that's problematic because it's not ultimately sufficient. Really, what McGowan wants to articulate is that it's about enjoyment, it's about desire, it's about satisfaction. And so I wonder, how do we include that into this narrative? That it isn't as much maybe about power, but that really there's something about desire and satisfaction and need, and that what they're erecting in the psychoanalytic sense is a master signifier, which is, for people listening, a master signifier is the signifier that starts the chain of signification. It starts the chain of meaning itself, but it's the signifier that has no signified. It doesn't have a referent that it's referring to, whether conceptually or even in the physical world. It's a sort of idea that is a term. It's a word. Well, it's not even an idea. It's a word that doesn't have an idea. It's a word or a theme or a logos or a frame that doesn't even have a concept behind it, but it fills itself in as meaning is developed. And then for Lacan, there's something called the quilting point, and the quilting point is like the period at a sentence that makes the sentence have value. So if I start saying like, Troy, I went to the beach yesterday and I did push-ups. You didn't understand what I was saying until I stopped and I said I did push-ups, because you're like, okay, where are you going with this? And then you can retroactively make sense of the sentence, right? So the quilting point is the period when I stopped and I said I did push-ups. And that makes sense of the sentence. I went to the beach yesterday and I did push-ups. Now you get the meaning or the sense of that sentence. So I'm wondering if there's a way to kind of like psychoanalytically read this in the frame of master signifier, desire, like quilting points and signification that buttresses this other kind of power-driven narrative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm not super concerned with psychoanalyzing the whole process and making it about enjoyment necessarily.
Okay.
But where did you want to go with that? Is there
Well,
a
I'm
approach
just
between the
wondering.
two?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a tension in that it isn't really about power or preservation or fear as much as it is about, or like threat or something, which is I know that you're not using those words, but I wonder if that's kind of what you're getting at. And I wonder if there's just a different way to orient it, that it's really about like this perversion of enjoyment. It's a perversion based on a desire. Now, some people would say, well, but it's a desire for power, or it's a desire for control, or it's a desire for whatever. But is it a desire for enjoyment? It's a desire for satisfaction. And they think that they're being satisfied by erecting this master signifier, or by living according to this master signifier, by subsuming themselves under the master signifier, which becomes the thing that actually suppresses true universality. Because in Prozorov's terms, it's an imperfect nihilism. It's like a reification of contingencies that's erected as a universal, but it's not really the universal. It's a suppression of true universality. You know?
Yeah, I mean, isn't it just both though? I mean, maybe it's just too easy for me to think this way. But
Yeah, probably.
when you see these things as threats and you sort of line up and hold hands or cross arms or whatever in defense of what you find to be of utmost value to yourself, which includes you having power over other people, then you get like a perverse sense of enjoyment out of that, don't you? Like when you gang up together against a threat, there's a certain joy that comes from that. It's a persecution complex, which lots of groups have, right? Most groups today seem to have some sort of persecution complex, whether it's some are more based in reality than others, but there's a perverse kind of enjoyment that comes from that, right?
Yeah, I mean, the psychoanalytic reading would be that you only get enjoyment by excluding the other, right? That the master signifier is essentially this erection of a site of exclusion. It's a narrative that becomes the thing that identifies your community or your own subjective experience, that is essentially exclusive. And it's created in distancing yourself from the other. That's essential, that there's essentially a relationality in that enjoyment. And it's a negative enjoyment. It's I'm enjoying the exclusion of the other by hating the other, and that is my enjoyment.
Yeah, I think you definitely kind of coalesce those together, make more sense of it.
Yeah, no, you're right. I agree. And I think maybe if I'm going awry here, it would be my tendency is that maybe I'm being overly reductive, and I'm trying to find like what is the ultimate cause, So maybe even that question itself is problematic.
Yeah, I think the main point for me is to look at these theoretical foundations, like the fetishization of scripture, power dynamics at play amongst people who are the authorities on scripture, which I don't think many people spend a lot of time thinking about, and tie those into the phenomenon that we all see, which is the fact that these are the people who all voted for Trump, even though many of them, I'm sure begrudgingly, really honestly believe that voting for Trump would be better than for Hillary. And they had reasoned judgments for thinking so.
I don't think it was so begrudgingly the more I think about it, dude.
Sometimes. But I think they would have said, and honestly, that they wish there could have been better options. But the statement's right here.
True.
Some cultures operate on assumptions that are inherently better than those of other cultures. That's the justification for Trump may not be perfect, but the culture that his figure instantiates, for whatever faults it has, is better inherently than anything that mainstream liberalism, let alone something more to the left, would instantiate.
Yeah. You know what's crazy, man? I think about this sometimes, and not to get super like my daddy and I have issues, but I talk about this sometimes where I'm like, the thing that's frustrating is I could literally cure cancer, I could cure world poverty, I could eradicate anger, racial prejudice, violence, war, but it's not ultimately what matters according to a particular worldview, the evangelical worldview, because ultimately what matters is the quote unquote state of your soul. So if you do all of those things, but it's not done just simply because it's like the outflowing of your sanctification or something along those lines, but you're already justified, then none of that matters. All of that shit is inconsequential because ultimately it doesn't contribute to salvation. So the whole thing, the whole criticism, the whole fetishization of a particular orientation is based upon a very simple idea of the world rooted in soteriology and eschatology. And if it doesn't fit into that tiny window, then nothing else ultimately matters. And that's what's strange to me.
Yeah, dude, it seems so perverse, right? I mean, one of my favorite things that Zizek ever said was he was quoting, the famous Dostoevsky quote, which is that if God is dead, everything is permitted. And Zizek says, I'm going to turn that around and say, if God exists, everything is permitted. Because you can use God to justify everything that goes against your natural moral inclinations. And the obvious example is stuff like, suicide, terrorism, or whatever, right? But even stuff like, I don't want a better world because it comes from the wrong perspective. It comes from the wrong source or something,
Right.
which I think if anyone's in the right mind would find pretty perverse. But following from this line of thinking, if you've been inculcated in this line of thinking for a long time, maybe since you were a child, it can follow in a masquerade of rationality. And so it's no surprise to me that you can have statements that say, well, we don't have any racism problems in the church. Or you can have, we're going to maybe get a little specific here. Maybe we shouldn't do this, but our old alma mater is now under investigation by the accreditation agencies for a various number of faults, including bouts of intimidation, bullying, and fear in administration, and corruption in the board of directors for the school.
Right.
And I don't want to get too into that because I don't want to be liable or anything, and I don't know any more than what the local newspapers say. But if indeed that stuff is true, and I think we've had experience of many years at that school, and it's really not hard to believe some of that stuff is true. That stuff follows. It's not that they're all just hypocrites, like they're the pastor who actually has gay sex with 15-year-olds, right? The conservative pastor who does that and then rails against homosexuality, or Alex Jones who rails against the chemicals that make the frogs gay. At the same time, he watches transgender porn. Did you see about that? He got caught with a tab open for transgender porn.
It was just research, bro.
Oh, it's fantastic, dude. Everybody out there, go on Reddit and search for Alex Jones transgender porn. And
He's such a fucking charlatan, man.
It's hilarious. Yeah, it's not that. That's like the simple, stupid stuff. This stuff is actually rationalized, right? MacArthur came out in the first chapel of the semester, apparently, and said that he thinks that this is a coordinated attack by people against himself personally, and if not by individuals, by Satan himself. That's what he said. They see this as a personal attack,
right,
on them as the leaders themselves, by outside forces which are determined, that have no agency but are determined only to destroy them. And when you see the world that way, you can justify things that in your right mind you would never find justified.
I know this is quite superficial, but there's something seriously small-minded and hubristic about that. That it's so narcissistic that this is about me and they're coming after us and me. Fucking brother, do you know how big the universe is? Get over yourself, man. If you really believe that God is as big as you claim him to be, get the fuck over yourself and think outwardly. Stop thinking so much about yourself. And that's ultimately what's so strange about this disposition that I see sometimes, is that it's like a narcissism. I don't even know how to say this. A narcissification of theology. And I don't mean that that's like a bastardization of the pure, but rather of a theological orientation, of a spirituality, of a connection with that which is beyond, or something like that. But it's basically when Feuerbach says that theology is anthropology writ large, right? That's kind of what I see here. It's that it's my concerns, my fears, my own obsession with self inflated outwards and projected as a universal.
Yeah, when you consider an attack on yourself, which may be fully justified because you've done things wrong, as an attack on God himself, then that, in a sense, means you've kind of equated yourself with God, or at least put yourself so
Exactly.
close to God that you can't distinguish between an attack on one and an attack on the other, and whether or not one is justified versus unjustified, and how you'd possibly adjudicate between, justified attacks and unjustified attacks. That's all erased. All that nuance is erased. And that I think that's why I just trend towards this naked definition of power as at the root of this thing. It might just be as ugly as that.
Man. Dude, you know what's so crazy? So we're probably going to have to wrap up the main segment here and move on to the next segment. But how easy was this conversation for us? Like, I feel like we could talk about this for another 10 hours.
I know, right?
Or 20 years.
Yeah, stuff's been happening recently, and we're totally removed from this sphere. Like, I don't talk to anybody who's still in those groups at all. So we're not claiming any sort of like authority on what's happening currently. But just from our own experiences, there's a way of making sense of some of this stuff that I think it's helpful to talk about, because that stuff, man, that affected us so much during our formative years. There was a lot of heartache and a lot of stress that came from our exit from, a particular ideology which governed our lives and our thinking for quite a while. That stuff's always going to be there with us, right? Both the negative senses, in which it's kind of traumatizing, and also the positive senses. And we have positive experiences that we associate with those times, and they formed us into who we are.
Yeah, I'm getting teary-eyed just hearing you say that, because it's 100% true, And I think maybe I'm a little bit more connected to people and to that community than you are, just because of my engagement on social media and friends that reach out to me, and we can vent about these things, and they send me articles about the latest news with the university, and I still am quite close with people that are very immersed in, if not that particular university or that particular church community that we were a part of, at least like allies with them, Yeah, it is. It's like it's almost like all of my work that I'm doing is still an outflow of my concerns from that time, if that makes sense. I'm just asking the same questions, but I'm using different tools and resources in so many ways. The thing that ruined me in undergrad when I read N.T. Wright and Jean-François Lyotard, the reason that it ruined me is because I was still concerned with this idea that I got from Jesus, loving your neighbor. And the 2 great commandments, and they talk about this in the Declaration. It actually made me fucking angry when I read it. They talk about the 10 commandments that ultimately can be distilled into the 2 commandments, which is love God and love your neighbor. The best thing I ever heard was, no, you love God by loving your neighbor. That's it. Like, it's not you love your neighbor if it's convenient, but really you love God first. Love God, and then that conditions how you love your neighbor. No, it's the other way around. It's you love your neighbor, and in loving your neighbor, that is loving God.
And that's not you saying that. That's literally Jesus.
That's literally Jesus. I know.
Yeah, if you did not love your neighbor, then he says you did not love me, even if you think you did. Yeah, that's literally Jesus.
Right. And I think that all of my concerns since then, from when I slowly creeped away towards the end of my undergrad years, and then I creeped away a little bit further when I was doing my master's, and then a little bit further with PhD research, I'm still asking the same fucking questions. It's okay, so how do we love our neighbor? What does that mean? That's the there is a for all from the Prozorov text, right? It's okay, so how do we figure out, if there is a for all, then how do we articulate that? What does that mean?
Yeah, dude, I mean, if we can kind of wrap this up, I think the drives that we had in college were for goodness and for truth. We wanted to figure out what was true, and we wanted to figure out how to live life that was good. And those things drive, I think, everybody, actually, when it gets down to it. And some people got so bastardized along the way that they only cared about sort of keeping their current beliefs sort of intact rather than this kind of open, exploratory, drive to find out what's true from whatever source possible. And I think some of us just didn't do that. I think a lot of people just didn't find that satisfactory and eventually found your way outside of the bubble because the bubble wasn't satisfying those drives anymore.
Right.
And I think everyone's actually like that. And I think people that are stuck in that bubble are stifled. Like, I don't think that they're mentally, psychologically, spiritually healthy. I'm not saying that we are necessarily, or that everybody else is. No, but in different ways. Right. It's just not healthy to not drive after those things.
Right. Yeah, and I think the acknowledgement of not being healthy is important in determining or figuring out health. Because if you think you're healthy but you're not healthy, that's the problem. Yeah, that's more problematic.
That's Socrates, right? I know that I know nothing. Like it's just as simple as that. You're not claiming to have like some secret wisdom that no one else has. It's just saying, hey, at least we recognize that we don't have it. It's not as simple as that. I don't think it's hubristic to claim that.
Agreed. All right, sweet. I love that fucking conversation. We could talk about that forever. I'm sure we'll come back to it with from other perspectives in the future. But now we got to go on to something that is like the hallmark. This is what I look forward to the most in these episodes. The Shitty Minute primes the pumps. The main segment is great, but I enjoy hearing your kernels of sticky leaf goodness. So it's the Sticky Leaves. It's where one of us gets to talk about what it is that's giving us meaning in a somewhat, potentially, maybe, is it, meaningless world. Troy, what's up, man?
My Sticky Leaves is simple this week, man. Last Saturday, I saw the one and only David Byrne in concert at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles.
Why do I know that name?
And David Byrne was the frontman of the 80s band Talking Heads.
Oh, okay.
Talking Heads was one of my favorite bands of all time. He was one of my dad's favorite bands when he was playing music in the 80s. And so I always had Talking Heads around the house. I can't even talk about how much Talking Heads has influenced my own love for music. Everything from, quirky, intellectual, East Coast, 80s angular post-rock, post-punk stuff like Talking Heads was, all the way to, things that involve world music and stuff from African American musical culture and everything else. Talking Heads was just absolutely instrumental in my musical upbringing, and I think actually in pop music in general's musical evolutions from the 80s onwards. And David Byrne, or I should say Talking Heads, famously did a series of concerts in the 80s, I think in 1984, called the Stop Making Sense Tour, which is now a DVD. It was directed by Jonathan Demme, the guy who did Silence of the Lambs.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's
he
probably
just passed recently.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And it's a famous contra documentary. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. Even if you're not a huge fan of Talking Heads, it's fantastically shot and produced, and the whole thing is theatrical and great. And so David Byrne, now in his late 60s or early 70s, wanted to do something as grand in scale as that tour was in 1984. And so he does this tour right now. It's called American Utopia. It's going around the United States and the world. And it involves 13 to 15 people. It's a full-on theatrical performance with music, half of which is the Talking Head stuff and half of which is his own solo stuff. And I got my dad tickets for his birthday because Talking Heads was such a favorite of his. And it was just one of the best media experiences I've had in my life.
Wow.
I took my girlfriend, who's not really a Talking Heads fan, and she loved it. And so I think,
but she loves the theater, so I bet you that just was really kind of a smooth and kind of like it primed her for that,
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was so great to see so many old people. I think we were the youngest people that were there at the show.
Really?
Just so many people that obviously were huge fans in the 80s. And they were dancing in the aisles and just
Oh, I love it.
completely letting loose. And the Shrine Auditorium, I don't know if you've been there, but there's not a lot of room there. It's very vertical. There's not a lot of space. And people were just dancing everywhere and letting it out. And the show was so great. The performances were amazing. Everything was wireless. So all the participants were walking around doing, theatrical movements, almost like a marching band at times, around the stage, completely wireless. 4 or 5 percussionists. It was just a feat of. I've never seen a concert like it or a show like it in my life. And I would encourage anybody out there a couple things. One, if that show is coming to your town, you got to go see it, even if you don't even know who Talking Heads are or anything. It's worth it just for the experience. And if not, go back and listen to some Talking Heads records, because they are fantastic, man. Take up Talking Heads Remain in Light, that record, and just play it. And if you don't find yourself in some way engrossed in the music, I'm not going to say
eat your hand,
because then someone will do it and I'll have to do something on video. But I will be very surprised. I just love music, man. Music, performance, that stuff is great.
See, I know some songs by Talking Heads, but I can't say that for some reason I know the popular songs, the songs that are on the radio, and so I view them through a very narrow lens. Like I never really got into what they were doing, what they were saying, what they're like, where they fit in the history of post-punk or anything like that. So hearing you talk about this is it's stimulative for me, because it makes me want to go check them out a little bit more. Because I mean, when you listen to the songs, you're like, yeah, and I'll sing along to their music on the radio, but I don't feel like I have the connection that you do.
Yeah, and I mean, that's certainly a huge part of why it was such a great experience for me. But everyone else that I've talked to who's seen it, who doesn't have that connection, also loved it. So I think
Really?
it's a kind of thing that's just universal. Everybody would.
Well, fuck, I hope he's coming to Sydney then. That'd be sick. I would seriously, I mean, you sold me. So I'm going to actually literally, as soon as we stop this, I'm going to Google it and see if he's coming to Sydney.
Yeah, dude, it's totally worth it. And you know what? Everybody out there, go on YouTube and just search David Byrne American Utopia tour on YouTube and just watch a couple of because there's so many videos of people who have captured some of the performance. And I'm pretty sure they're going to make like a DVD out of it. I would have to imagine, given how much work was put into the choreography and whatnot.
Oh, that sounds sick, man. And when was this? Saturday?
Yeah, last Saturday.
Oh, well, cool. So I guess we'll wrap up now, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you guys for tuning in again to another episode of Owls at Dawn. If you dig what we're doing and you want to support us, go to patreon.com, please. Patreon.com/Owls at Dawn. If you become a patron, you can get access to bonus episodes, monthly newsletter, as well as being able to suggest topics for future episodes. We actually are going to be doing our first listener-based episode in the next few weeks here. Are we going to announce that now, or we got to think about it? We'll do it the next episode.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be doing it in the next few episodes. We haven't run the poll yet or anything, so that's still to come. So if you want to join the Patreon immediately and vote in the poll, you could do that.
Yeah, and then so you can vote in the poll, and then you can offer up suggestions before the poll, which will then give us, what are we going to do, like 4, something like that, topics out of the 10 that we've fielded so far. So if there's 20, then great, and we'll whittle it down to 4, and then we'll kind of keep those other suggestions in our back pocket and put them maybe in future polls. But yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to it. Some really good suggestions. Although a lot of you motherfuckers are like physicists and shit, and you want us to talk about like science and whatnot. I'll do my best, but fuck, man, that's a bit out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, if we talk about that stuff, I'm just gonna pretend that I'm like a scientific anarchist or something. Like I read some Paul Feyerabend, and I'm like, that's all bullshit, man.
Exactly. But yeah, so you can check that out. Hit us up on owlsatdawn.com. You can check out our back catalog. Twitter, owls_at_dawn. We've got a Facebook page.
You can also email us at owlsatdawnpodcast@gmail.com. And
iTunes.
yeah, ratings and reviews. Those always help.
Yes, please. Yes, they really do help. So, I think that's it, man. Is there anything else we got to do?
You know, just one more thing, Gabe.
What's up?
Das Vidania, Amerikanski.